Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the next episode of the All Me podcast. This is Don Hooton Jr., and today I'll be your host. When we're out delivering our education programs in schools and communities, adults always seem to be stunned when they learn that the use of appearance and performance-enhancing substances is no longer limited to professional athletes. The fact of the matter is that the use of these substances have worked its way into our middle schools and high schools. In today's world, these young users are not just our male athletes, but they're being used by our young males and females, athletes and non-athletes. The number one reason young people report that they're turning to these drugs is to look better. Today, these types of drugs are easier to obtain than most people want to believe. In today's episode, you're going to hear from Eric Feinberg, who has spent most of his career in advertising and social media. Over the past few years, Eric has uncovered some information about some of the world's largest social media platforms allowing the sale of illegal drugs on their sites. Parents and adult influencers, you're going to want to pay close attention to the information Eric is going to share in this podcast, because it's very easy for your loved ones to purchase anabolic steroids and other illegal substances from their smartphones, tablets, and computers. The drug dealers have now moved from the streets and have entered the four walls of our home. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Eric Feinberg, founding member at the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Center, which we're going to refer to as GIPEC. Eric and I first met in 2014 when Eric contacted us through our website pages about some information he had found on Google, Twitter, Facebook, and other sites that were selling illegal, most likely black market anabolic steroids and even human growth hormone. Some, if not more, of these websites still exist today. Eric is a wealth of information, and I know he's going to open a few eyes and drop a few jaws with some of the information he's going to share with you today. Welcome to the All Me podcast, Eric.
Hey, Don, thank you so much for having me. And I also want to thank you and your father and the foundation for all the work you're doing on this important issue. And of course, keeping Taylor's memory alive.
Man, we appreciate that and so thrilled to have you on today. I think people are going to be really excited and also, very interested to hear what you have to say. But as we've gotten to know each other over the past 5 to 6 years, you've always been an entrepreneur and someone that is very passionate about helping others. So tell us a little bit about your past businesses and what got you interested in finding companies who are peddling illegal drugs, and we're going to talk about some terrorism stuff, but on some of the world's most popular social media platforms.
Well, I've been in advertising my whole life. I studied marketing in school, and basically from day one, I've always been in what's known experiential marketing, basically connecting brands and fans in sports and entertainment. And back when social media was not yet out of the closet, but back in the mid-2000s, companies came to me with what I was already doing in experiential marketing and basically connecting the brands at events like the Super Bowl, NASCAR, Major League Baseball, All-Star games, and said, hey, Eric, why are you doing this? We know you have young people working for you. Could you go out and show that you're giving out a Motorola, the use of a Motorola phone or handing out a Pepsi? And while you're doing this, get you young people to put this photos up on Facebook or Friendster or MySpace at that time. So it wasn't that it resulted in any additional revenue for me, but clients asked me to look into this new technology and see what I refer to. The event was a stage, but now it became a studio.
Okay. So you were at the very, very beginnings of social media. When you mentioned things like MySpace, my brain just goes back to setting up my very first, MySpace account. Yeah. But so you said you were helping, organizations like the NFL with some of their social media. What social media, tell us about some of the social media that you were responsible for them. Were you handling all of their accounts, some of their accounts, or just, just specifically around events?
Special events for the NFL, which again is the Super Bowl, but also the Pro Bowl. And what the NFL came to us on, and I already was doing some type of experimental work for the NFL back in those days, we basically were asked to help back in 2009 and 2010 using social media to promote the Pro Bowl in South Florida with real fans or young fans with a McDonald's sponsorship to drive people to buy tickets to the 2010 Pro Bowl in Miami. So what that was leading up to the Pro Bowl, about 2 months before, we handled the voting for the NFL to send players, and then we had specific pages. And then about a month out, we started enlisting young fan ambassadors. And what we did is we got our revenue, the money we got from the NFL, we didn't give it directly to the ambassadors. We actually made donations to schools, to their AV department or other departments, and used their kids to go out and do this and basically friend to friend, promote the Pro Bowl, and we resulted in us selling out the game.
Wow, that's amazing. And, you know, for most of us that are active on social media today, we know how powerful the marketing can be, especially amongst our friends and surrounding events. Now, I mean, you can plan your own events, you know, on some of these social media accounts.
In those days, I saw the power of this, that, you know, you could literally, I was running a studio in New York, and I had all these young fans out in South Florida. We gave them, it was not consumer-generated content, but we called it consumer-directed content. So basically, we gave them a script, stay within the lines, told them what to do, and basically then sent them out. Part of it was to go over to McDonald's. You know, we buy them some food, we gave them some money to do it, and then, you know, post that they got this, like, discount to go get, I think, $5 or $10 off the Pro Bowl ticket to show that they did it and build their own album. And what I did, as I said, we worked with the schools and some of the communications department. I also felt for them, in addition to what we were doing at that time, because we're talking 2009, 2010, it was a good learning experience for some of these young people to really understand, you know, how to use this marketing tool of social media.
Yeah. You know, you're gathering all of these tools and we're thinking, you know, this is some incredible software. It's extremely powerful. But as we know with anything that, you know, that's powerful, that there is going to be some evil that comes along with it. And when we first met, you know, and this was, again, like I said, back in 2014, you know, you were coming to us with ads where companies were marketing illegal drugs on some of these social media sites. When did you start discovering these ads for illegal drugs? And, you know, what was your first reaction when you saw this? And is this something that's still going on today?
Well, first of all, it didn't start with illegal drugs. That was then, you know, second and third steps of it. What it started with, back in 2011, 2012, when I was still under contract to the NFL, I was posting NFL content, you know, having to do with the Pro Bowl, Super Bowl for the NFL. Next to my content that I was posting to Facebook specifically, I started noticing sponsored ads for $18 NFL jerseys. Well, me having the knowledge of, you know, sports and marketing and, you know, what apparel, what it costs, I knew at that time an NFL jersey or replica jersey was $85. So immediately I started seeing this, and other people working with me were seeing the same thing. And what we started doing is we started running down the rabbit hole and following these things back to Chinese counterfeit enterprises. And this was in, you know, large bulk, this was happening. And what really scared me was, at that time, not only was I getting the ad and people working with me for these $18 counterfeit jerseys from China, and what we are dealing with today with the privacy issues and who's getting access, you know, to our data. If I was getting these sponsored ads for Chinese counterfeit jerseys, it had to be the way social media is, that, you know, they profile people or want to know people of interest. That means my data had to be shared with China that I was an NFL fan.
Wow. So even at those early stages of social media, some of this, you know, data that people are worried about today being shared all over the place, even though you're out on one of these social media sites, was beginning to be shared for these types of sponsored ads, even for, at the time, you know, obviously illegal behavior to sell, you know, knockoff jerseys for $18, you know, using the NFL rights. Did the NFL take any steps at that time to do anything, you know, to take any corrective action?
No, they didn't take any action. In fact, I kind of went out on my own to bring attention to this. And as you see, you know, using my public relations skill. And I went out and talked to a number of media companies, and I think it just kind of, they weren't happy that I went out on my own. And that was really 2012, the end of my relationship with the NFL.
Why do you think at that time they didn't take steps to try to, you know, fix this situation online where people were knocking their jerseys off?
I think at that time it was new and different, and I didn't think they took it seriously. I sometimes think back now, and again, we look at the data issues regarding it. Again, my interest in the NFL and other people's interest in the NFL were being compromised by getting these counterfeit jerseys and the result of the algorithm. I think back now where we are, that maybe if we took steps in 2012, we might not be here where we are today with all this data and privacy issues with Russia and other countries interfering and using social media to this effect.
So you're finding this stuff in 2012. You part ways with the NFL and the social social media stuff that you're doing that. And that's when you founded GuidePack, which again stands for Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Center. Tell us about why you started this business. Talk about some of the software you have and when you begin to discover some of these illegal drugs being sold online and even some of the terrorist activities.
What I was able to do, and I understand this, and this goes back to 2012, 2013. What I started doing is, from the standpoint of what we did here, is really understand the algorithms or how these social media platforms work and how they put content in front of you. So what I started doing at that time, and again, how we developed this software and what the software is, we started looking at patterns, pattern analysis. So not where other companies in my space look at it and do a takedown. It's getting a better understanding of how these criminal enterprises work, what they do, what are the hot buttons they use, the communications, the coding, and everything. And literally what we did is we started studying the enterprise.
Okay.
And following, by reverse engineering the algorithms, how the enterprises work and what anomalies, okay, and how then I got into the drug space. I started seeing, or when certain things were reported about the drugs, just like an $18 NFL jersey is an anomaly, it's $85. Louis Vuitton bags, which was also being fed to us by, some of the things we were doing for luxury brands, were being fed to us for $99. We know Louis Vuitton bags. I started thinking about other anomalies. And one of the other anomalies I saw, and things were written about illegal drugs. And here's your anomaly. When you talk about a prescriptive drug and you start seeing that you can buy this with no prescription, no RX, or available without a prescription, I started building code or communications that started searching, certain things like Viagra, codeine, and of course, HGH, steroids, no RX. So basically how the initial stage of what the software did is built on communication anomalies. And that's how we got into the drug space too.
And what's interesting, Eric, is we go out and we share our message in schools and with parents. And I know you attended our All-Star Gala last year, and you can see the look on people's faces when you tell them that their kids can find illegal prescription drugs and everything, including anabolic steroids and human growth hormone, in the palms of their hands. And this is something that your software is finding. I mean, what can we do to put a stop to some of the sales of these drugs online?
Well, first of all, what we're doing through your work, the work of the Digital Citizens Alliance and myself to put out these reports, at least we're enlightening people through our reports and the press we get on this, that this is going on. Now, the next step needs to be, and what we're working on is, I sent you the other night the 60-minute segment with YouTube, and this is well documented in what we've done and what the Digital Citizens Alliance has done, that you can find on YouTube videos on how to buy steroids, how to buy HGH products such as geotrope and homotrope, and actually how to get the ingredients to manufacture steroid products yourself on YouTube.
Okay. And just for clarification for those that are listening, genotropin is an injection form of human growth hormone. So a doctor would prescribe this and would be used to treat growth failure in children or even adults that lack growth hormone. And it's going to come along with some side effects like headaches, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, and even muscle and joint pain. So that's what Eric is referring to, that young people and even adults are able to find online. That leads me to my next topic, Eric, that I think a lot of people need to understand and listen to. Let's talk about a piece of internet legislation here for a minute called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. And this legislation basically says, and Eric, and I'm going to have you sort of elaborate on it, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Now, I know that's a lot of words to listen to, but Eric, can you break that down for us? What exactly does that mean? And why is this Section 230 in place, and what does it do?
What it means is, and again, we're going back to 1996, when basically you access the internet through AOL and Netscape through dial-up, right? And what it means is that the social media companies, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snap, they're not responsible for content put up by other parties. So basically, I could create a page on Facebook, and Chinese counterfeit enterprises selling this illegal steroids are creating Facebook pages, YouTube videos, Twitter accounts, and Instagram accounts, and basically putting the stuff up there, selling what I'm calling poison. And Facebook, the social media companies, are not responsible for this content for Section 230 because their argument is we're not the publisher. We're just the content provider.
Yeah. So, and if we think about it, Eric, this was back in 1996. I mean, I think especially folks my age, I mean, I was just getting into high school and people were just then getting beepers. So we didn't have smartphones at that time. Nobody would even have thought of what MySpace or even Facebook might be. So this act is very old, but yet it's still causing problems today. And here we are, 20 years later?
23 years to be exact right now. Going on 24. And what it is, and this is what's not in or what people don't understand, what I keep, what we've discussed here and what our Digital Systems Alliance report said and other reports I put out there. It's not that I'm searching this bad stuff, but because of the algorithms, knowing about my likes and data and what, I engage with, it's recommending to me the bad stuff. So vis-a-vis, when I log on to Facebook, my suggested groups are for illegal steroid sellers. When I go on to YouTube, my recommended videos are for illegal steroids or geotropin or how to create, steroid product. When I go on Instagram, I get the same thing, suggested group, same thing on Twitter, suggested pages. So this is where I think, and again, going back to the 60-minute piece, on Sunday, Leslie Stoll brought it up when she was talking to Susan Wachowski of YouTube. If your algorithm are recommending to users this nefarious or toxic content, shouldn't you be held responsible?
And they're not, right?
And they're not. And the laws are antiquated. I think we have a lot of politicians from 1996 who are still in Congress. And one of the things I'm working on, and someone who's become a friend of both of us, located in the Dallas area, Dallas police sergeant named Trey Penny, who's running for Congress in Section 230 and on his platform, is basically taking on Section 230 to take away that immunity. In addition, I've been asked by former Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, who was ambassador to Morocco under Clinton, to now be what's known as Vice President of Content Moderation for a new coalition called the Coalition for a Safer Web, which is a nonpartisan 501c4 advocating to reduce the threat posed on social media platforms and the web. Originally, it was for extremist content, hate, Nazi, anti-Semitism. But part of me coming onto this coalition, I said I'm in, but I also want to make sure that part of our mission, our advocacy, is for the sale of illicit content, which includes the sale of illegal steroids and other drugs. And again, you can find it at coalitionsw.org. And I think it's important for people to know this because the social media companies are spending about $35 to $40 million a year to lobby Congress to keep, these laws in place that protect them. I think there needs to be lobbying on the other side, and we're in the process now of raising funds, of going out to, individuals in corporate America to, basically combat this in the sense of, getting, of course, rescinding Section 230 and other laws that protect these social media companies.
And one of the things that we'll do, Eric, for anybody listening is we're going to place some of these links into the show notes so that they can find the websites that you're talking about. I'll also place a link to the 60-minute piece that was done, because I think what's really important is to really listen and hear what these social media companies are responding to. And what they're responding to is the Section 230 is basically I can put whatever I want, or our users can put whatever they want on our platforms, and we're just not responsible for that. Now, that might have made sense back in 1996, but when you have young people that are laying in bed at nighttime, they're out on their cell phones, they're looking at some of these apps and these social medias, they could be being targeted for the sale of illegal anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, even other drugs. And that's very concerning. Eric, what can people do that are listening? What can they do to help? Is there anything that you would tell them like, hey, we need your help on the following? What might that be?
Well, let me give you one thing before I start on that. You know what's become one of the most dangerous words in today's world? Search. Because how this all starts is, and what I told you is, and what you brought up, because every young person has a smartphone, and how everything works is through these, search engines on Google, search on Facebook. So that to me is one of the most dangerous words or applications out there, because you can search these things with just the ability of a smartphone. And I think getting back to your last question,
what people who are listening to this podcast can do to help with the Section 230 or help spread awareness?
Well, first, like I said, is, looking to see and getting on the phone to your congressman and senator to talk more about this. right now, and I'm just watching this with Trump over at NATO, there's a bill right now in front of Congress. It's being held up right now, the new trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Within that trade agreement is actually continuing the Section 230 immunity, not only here in the United States, but now transferring it over the border to Mexico and Canada. Well, that becomes a very slippery slope, especially when you realize that some of these drugs are actually coming through either directly or a stop point from China, Canada, and Mexico. So right now, anybody who's listening on this call, please get on the phone to your congressman, get on the phone to your senator, and tell them that the trade agreement between Mexico and Canada, you're all for, but do not include the immunity of Section 230, that it will not only be a U.S. law, but will now transfer it to a law in Canada and Mexico. And that's immediate. Now, next step, as I said, as we go into 2020, we need to look at more candidates, especially, like I mentioned, Trey Penny, who's running in Section 230, and making sure that people go to their congressmen and senators and rescind this immunity when it comes to these social media companies. Because as long as these companies can hide behind 230, there is no recourse that people can sue these companies for allowing this nefarious content on these sites.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you've mentioned along the way, Eric, is some of the hate speech and even terrorism, that's been found on some of these social media sites. Can you elaborate on that for a minute and sort of maybe share a couple of stories and some of the things that you have found out on social media relating to these topics?
Yeah, what happened was, and myself being Jewish, back in 2015, when the Charlie Hebdo attack happened, YouTube went out, and again, it talked about that group that attacked the French newspaper, said they were radicalized. There were the YouTube videos up there in 2015. And again, Susan Wojcicki of YouTube came out that day and said, well, yeah, at that time, it's tough for us to monitor 300 hours of YouTube video that's uploaded every minute. I got curious about that while I was working on a course, the intellectual property side, the sale of illegal drugs, counterfeit goods. And I said, you know what? And especially as a Jew, I really need to look into this to see how this is happening. And I actually started studying and figuring out what I was seeing on YouTube, certain videos which started like, gaming videos, okay? With the terms, of course, Allah Akbar, different terms in Arabic I could pick up. And I started within the process of the software really studying at that time how ISIS, communications by ISIS, what they use that we would not use. And in those days, it was about the caliphate. So I started looking at caliphate and different variations of the word caliphate. And then, of course, I grew other communication strands around it and different variations of. So back in 2016, I started picking up, of course, caliphate with a K and an H at the end, BN and FR. This was in like late spring, early summer. And I started having the software start digging that extensively, anything I could find with that. Well, Caliphate BN stood for Caliphate Bangladesh. And I started cross-referencing what it was getting as I was bringing out the data, of course, social media. And I started studying patterns, certain things, and this was in late June of 2016. On June 30th or July 1st, 2016, there was actually an attack in Bangladesh. And when I look back at the accounts I had, there was a warning with those hashtags, Caliphate BN, that something was going to happen. I have that data. So, and then of course, when it happened, they went back and used the same hashtag. I said, that was consequential one. After that, a few days after, on July 3rd, I started finding the same accounts or similar patterns with a hashtag called Caliphate FR, Caliphate France. On with certain things at that time, it was the European Soccer Cup. I started following patterns, what was happening, and Bastille Day, of course, was in that time frame. Sure enough, 14 days later, in Nice, we had an attack in Nice. What happened after that, and that's really when our software really went to the next level, because I called it consequential data. If I could track the versions of Caliphate, FR, BN, like I said, DE, which is Germany, EN, which is English, I was able to then build profiles of communication strands used by ISIS off those initial communication strands and on other communication strands, because unfortunately, I knew those communication strands were consequential and resulted in terrorist attacks. And literally, our software was able to, in some regards, not anticipate specifically, city or location, but was able to predict within reason that there were going to be terrorist attacks in Bangladesh and France within the time frames we saw.
Wow. I'm at a loss for words, which is not very common for me, but that's scary. I mean, and we live in a dangerous world today, so for those of you listening that have young people, there's young people that are under your roof, please monitor what they're looking at on their smartphones, their iPads, and their computers, because as Eric's telling us here, there's some really scary information that's being shared out on the internet and kids are being exposed to it. So I do want to shift gears for a minute though, Eric, because last year about this time, I'll never forget this because I remember you sending me an email basically requesting a phone call with me and said, hey, I've got some information that I found relating to the Taylor Hooton Foundation using my software. And I said, okay, great. So, we got on the phone fairly quickly. And I'll remember the conversation because right before we got on the phone call, you had sent me a screenshot of the Taylor Hooton Foundation Facebook page. And at that time, we had run a paid-for ad on Facebook that was promoting our annual All-Star Gala, which is our largest fundraiser of the year. And I remember looking at that picture, and just to the right of it, sort of on the section where they have the ads, was an ad that was promoting the sale of illegal anabolic steroids, which was very shocking to see. And as again, I'll put this in the show notes, but it's something that we like to show parents and adult influencers when we're delivering our assembly program so that they can see just what type of drugs are able to be sold on these sites. And this ultimately led us to a project with the Digital Citizens Alliance, who released a report just earlier this year titled Digital Platforms on Steroids and How Facebook and Google Enable the Sale of Illegal Appearance and Performance Enhancing Drugs. And we're going to have some of the folks on the podcast soon with Digital Citizens Alliance to talk about more of their work, and we're going to dive into that report. But Eric, if you can, just briefly tell us what was your role in the report and just what was some of the information that you uncovered?
Well, the report was a second in a series, I would say, of what we've exposed on the sale of illegal drugs on the social media platforms. We worked on our own back in 2018 with the Washington Post on releasing a story of the sale of opioid products on social media. Now, within finding the sale of these opioid products on social media, Instagram, with the Washington Post, there was some collateral information on the steroids. Not only, and it's kind of reversed today, not only were these pages or profiles or these YouTube videos selling opioid products, but they were also, when you look at it or go on their website, selling steroids. So what I did was, knowing in my mind that this was singular in what we were exposing with the Washington Post on sale of the opioids on Instagram and the other platforms, I said, I'm going to hold back this information and kind of continue with it and then, go to see what rabbit hole I could go down with, especially how it came with that with the algorithm. So after that report came out, I know that, Tom and Adam have always had something for this. And I think just collaborating or kind of casually collaborating, we talked about this time last year or maybe January of working on a 6-month study, which, had us kind of dig into, what was happening using almost the same protocols and procedures we did on the opioids to look into how illegal steroids are being sold on the social media platforms. So how that happened was I was already in process. And what I told you about the algorithms, how I was able to get not an ad, but it's called suggested group. These are group pages. And of course I follow you. So it was coming through my news feed that Facebook is putting up for me to say, hey, Eric, we know you have an interest in steroids. You're liking steroid pages. You're engaging with other steroid pages. Here's another steroid page you might want to look into. And that's how that came about. And again, it comes to, I'm not searching illegal content or terrorism. Illegal content is searching me.
It's interesting. It happens on my personal Facebook feed as well, where, it's promoting, just due to my searches and, looking for anabolic steroids and human growth hormone and doing research on this type of topic. It's interesting how I'm targeted as well, even though we're in the line of work of spreading the truths about the dangers of appearance and performance enhancing substances. But Eric, what is the most important tip that you can share with parents and adult influencers out there who have loved ones who are using the internet each day?
I think you've got to realize now that this is not as it sits right now. And that's, again, if you look at what we've just created, this 501c4 Coalition for Safer Web, the web and social media especially is not safe. Just like anything, what is yet to catch on, and these social media companies are not getting it. They want to say that this is the new neighborhood of we're connecting the world. Well, whether you connect the world virtually or the real world, you have to understand that there are bad actors in both places. And the social media companies in Silicon Valley continue to stonewall give us rhetoric, and basically kick the can down the road when it comes to bad actors using their platforms. And especially when it comes to have the immunity of Section 230, there's no real incentive to do this. So my advice to parents or anybody doing this is understanding. And just as I said, right now, web and especially social media is not safe. And again, coming back to that's why we created, or Ambassador Ginsburg created, the Coalition for a Safer Web. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Make the web safe for all.
And I think everybody listening to this podcast will completely agree. So, Eric, you've covered a lot of great information, and I know people will really enjoy listening to this podcast, and I believe we will be opening some eyes as well. Let's have a couple of fun questions here, and we'd like to call these our curveball questions. So these are stuff we wouldn't discuss in advance, but let me ask you, what is one thing people may not know about you?
I just think I'm understated. I think one of the things is I actually call myself, and I'm kidding this, my understatedness. I think you see this, I travel light, but you see my persona. And I'm not one to really, we talk about this, but I'm not one to brag about this. So I kind of blend in. But you and I both know that, I do have a voice around the world.
You do, and you're not afraid to share it, which you shouldn't be. What is one thing you want the listeners to take away about the Taylor Hooton Foundation and the whole movement around All Me?
I think to take away what you're doing, what you started with, which is, of course, the education and the grassroots with kids and young people. And, of course, how now, and especially with this podcast and the work you're doing with the Digital Citizens Alliance, that as this issue and crisis has evolved to on the web, you're evolving to not only the great work you're doing in the real world as far as the education on the ball fields and with young people in the real world, but what's happening here on the web. And I think it's fantastic that you're evolving with the issue as the issue evolves, especially to the web.
Well, we appreciate it, Eric. And it's work we cannot do without people like you. Last, but certainly not least, out of all the places that you visited, what is your favorite place?
I have all of it. I will say this, and I really, because of my work in event marketing, I got to see a lot of different parts of the country, including my work when I worked for Sprint and NASCAR. I went to places I never thought, Charlotte, Talladega, Kansas City. So I think one of the things I could say, and I've traveled abroad, I think the United States, very important and I'll say this, there are people in the generation who have mixed issues when it comes to the United States flag and the United States. And I will say this, and again, the work we're doing here and people like you, Sergeant Penny, Mark Ginsburg, the people I know, I think as in anything, I'm proud to be an American. And I think one of the things that we have to look at here, because what has happened here is, and because of this lax oversight, we're allowing foreign enterprises to interfere in the American way of life. So let me just say, United States as a whole.
All right. Well, good American, Eric. So I just want to thank you again for all that you're doing to protect us while we're online, all of the information you're sharing and the advocacy that you're providing to help clean up the internet, these social media platforms that are putting us in harm's way. And you have an amazing heart, and I know you're saving lives, and we just appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule today to join us on the All Me podcast. And I know people look forward to hearing it, but thanks for taking your time to visit with us today, Eric.
Hey, thank you, Don, for having me, and I look forward to this and future podcasts.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.